Okay, welcome back from break. This topic of understanding and experiencing the four stages of enlightenment, I'm going to be teaching this to you in order to help you understand the four stages, but I don't go into it as much detail here in this class. We do talk about it and we go into it more detail than I have in other classes. But this course, I really focus a lot more on the jhanas. And then when you get into the retreat in August, the one in January in August, that's where I really focus in a lot more on the stages of enlightenment, because somebody's ready at that point to really start focusing on those. So each one of these courses have a certain thought put into what are we going to focus on and what are we spending the most time on. So this particular talk isn't going to be the same length of time as the one that we just did, just so you guys know. But as we go, just like with everything else, feel free to ask any and all questions that you like. So talking about these four stages of enlightenment, getting into the first stage of enlightenment, it's a big accomplishment because your mind can't regress from that point forward. You're only going to see forward progress, unlike the jhanas. With the jhanas, your mind will regress if you become complacent. If you became complacent in the first stage of enlightenment, your mind will still stay in the first stage of enlightenment. But the thing is that you're not going to become complacent in the first stage of enlightenment, because from that point forward, you know that your mind is going to get to enlightenment. You've seen significant improvement. The discontentedness that you are experiencing in the first stage of enlightenment is a mere fraction of what you once were experiencing when you were off the path to enlightenment. So I'm going to explain to you all these different four stages, and it's when you get to the fourth stage that your mind is actually enlightened, and that's where all discontentedness is completely eliminated. But there's four individual phases or four individual stages that your mind goes through on its way to this. So first, let's talk about what the four stages of enlightenment are. It's guidance for this personal growth to essentially plot your course towards the complete elimination of discontentedness, the complete elimination of the 10 fetters. The Buddha organizes the fetters in a certain sequence for a reason. You can be working on fetter 8 while you're also working on fetter 2, for example, or 3 or what have you. There's no reason why you can't work on all these fetters at different times, but it does help you to plot your course in terms of how you progress in your journey to enlightenment. So understanding the fetters in the order that they're in, it's like personal growth. It's helping you to plot your course forward in your development on the path to enlightenment. It helps you to understand and explains the development of the mind while focusing on eliminating the fetters and moving the mind to enlightenment. You can see the development as the mind goes forward. As a practitioner is eliminating the 10 fetters, the mind's moving through these four stages of enlightenment in higher and higher degrees of focus, concentration, memory, and clarity of mind. And there's this gradual decreasing of discontentedness. When we say enlightenment, sometimes people think it's a light switch. They think it's sudden. And this is because oftentimes people are experiencing the jhanas. Sometimes those jhanas can be very sudden. You can have a very sudden shift with the jhanas, but getting into enlightenment isn't that. It's not like you flip a light switch that 1 minute ago you were unenlightened and now you're enlightened. It's not like that. There's these gradual improvements of the qualities of mind as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment. And as you're moving through these four stages of enlightenment and these fetters are starting to be eliminated, that's why the qualities are starting to shine through more and more. Just like I mentioned the analogy of the sun and the clouds, as the clouds are coming back, the rays of the sun are slowly starting to shine through the clouds. It's the same thing with the enlightened mind. So as you're moving through these four stages, you're getting these higher and higher degrees of qualities of focus, concentration, memory, and clarity, and all these other qualities too. Once the mind's in the first stage of enlightenment, it won't regress. It's impossible for it to move backwards from that point forward. You're only going to move forward. There's an ability to become a little bit complacent here and there in terms of maybe you don't meditate for 2 or 3 days while you're in the first stage of enlightenment and you're still like a little bit complacent from that degree, from that standpoint, but you're removed all doubt, as you're going to see. You have removed all doubt about the teachings. So overall, you're not going to become complacent, but you can have little periods of time where you're a little bit complacent here and there. But overall, you're going to continue to make forward progress by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment. What the four stages of enlightenment are not, just like the jhanas, it's not something to be boastful about. It's not something to be conceited about. You're not going to put it on your website or your Facebook page. You're not going to call up mom like, hey, mom, guess what? I'm in the first stage of enlightenment. Aren't you proud of me? You've never had a child that's been in the first stage of enlightenment before. I'm the first one, right? You're not going to do those kinds of things. This is just to plot your course forward. And again, you're probably not going to talk about this, or it would be unwise to talk about this with anybody other than your teacher. Because if you went around with members of this community or other places, be like, yeah, I'm in the first stage of enlightenment. Aren't you proud of me? Isn't that great? Like, yeah, I'm better than all of you guys. That's like the exact opposite of what you're interested in doing. So you might talk about this like, hey, teacher, I think I'm in the first or second or third stage of enlightenment. And you might get some insight from your teacher on that, but it's not something that you're going to be talking about with the people at large, right? The four stages of enlightenment aren't something that are only experienced by ordained practitioners. Sometimes people think this. Sometimes people think household practitioners can only experience the first stage of enlightenment, or can only experience the jhanas, or it's only ordained practitioners that can get to the fourth stage of enlightenment. This is untrue. All individuals can get to the first, second, third, and fourth stages of enlightenment. There's nothing about putting on an orange robe and shaving your hair and living in a monastery that changes the mind by itself. That having an orange robe, shaving your hair, and living in a monastery, these are all kind of the things that go along with becoming ordained, but that by itself isn't going to produce enlightenment. There's still the work of eliminating the 10 fetters. And just like the mind of a human being who's wearing an orange robe, shave their head, and staying at a monastery, they need to eliminate those 10 fetters. The same thing is true for you. You need to eliminate those too. During the lifetime of the Buddha, it was much more rare for a household practitioner to get to enlightenment, but it did occur. But it was very rare because household practitioners during the lifetime of the Buddha, they had a lot more things that they were doing. Like imagine just getting water at your house. That was like a 4-hour, all day, 6-hour, 8-hour affair where you had to be carrying water from the well to your house. And you and probably other members of your household had to do that 2 or 3 times a week, where you were filling up the trough and making sure you had water at your house. We don't have to do that anymore. We can just turn a spigot and we've got water. Think about what it took to get food or clothing or other things like this. There was a lot of time involved in just sustaining your life 2,500 years ago that they didn't always have the time to be studying the teachings, to be meditating, to do things like this. So oftentimes the people who are getting to enlightenment that were household practitioners during the lifetime of the Buddha, they were rich and wealthy people that had servants that took care of these things for them so that they had the time to be able to get to enlightenment. So this is one of the other misunderstandings about the path to enlightenment. Some people think you need to be rich in order to get to enlightenment. And this is, if you think that, that householders can get to enlightenment, some people think, oh, you have to be rich in order to get to enlightenment. But this isn't actually true. This is just the nature of what was happening during the lifetime of the Buddha, the causes and conditions of how challenging it was to survive as a household practitioner, that they didn't have the time available to them to meditate and do the things that they needed to do to learn the teachings. Nowadays, we have so much time, so much available time, we fill it up with all kinds of unbeneficial things, right? We search social media endlessly. We watch YouTube videos endlessly. We do all kinds of other unbeneficial things. So when you start clearing some of those things out of your life, or at least reducing them, you'll have a lot more time, and you're more likely to get to enlightenment now during this lifetime as a household practitioner than even during the lifetime of the Buddha, because you have more time available to you and you have more resources. You can sit down and read a book. You can watch a video. You can listen to a podcast. Where during the lifetime of the Buddha, to learn the teachings, you had to be sitting right there with him. You had to be physically in his presence to be able to learn the teachings. Where nowadays you have much more conveniences to be able to learn and investigate the teachings than even existed during his lifetime. So these 4 stages of enlightenment can be attained by all practitioners. It's not just ordained practitioners. These 4 stages of enlightenment aren't something to crave or become obsessed about, because that's just going to take you in the opposite direction of what you're actually trying to accomplish, which is eliminating craving, desire, attachment. So sometimes when people hear the degree of peacefulness and calmness and joy that is in the enlightened mind, sometimes people start craving enlightenment itself, or craving any particular stage of enlightenment itself. One of the ways to eliminate that from the mind is to consider that your mind is already enlightened and you just have these pollutions that are in the way, and you got to get rid of them in order to experience the qualities of enlightenment. We usually talk about enlightenment as attaining enlightenment because it's something you need to attain. And when you have to attain something, meaning you don't have it and you have to attain it, oftentimes the mind will be more likely to crave it. So if you really want the iPhone 15 and you don't have it, you will crave it and long and yearn for it. Whereas if it's sitting in your closet and you just haven't unboxed it yet, it's kind of like, yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it, right? I'll just unbox it when I unbox it. I've already got it. So the mind doesn't necessarily crave it, right? Because it's just sitting in the closet. You already got it. So it's the same kind of thing that if you think about it as your mind is already enlightened, but you just have to remove the pollution in order to experience it, this can help you eliminate the craving for enlightenment itself. And this analogy actually goes much better with what you experience as you make your way to enlightenment. Because if the mind wasn't already enlightened, the qualities of enlightenment wouldn't be able to shine through as you're removing the pollutions. So you can think about it as the natural state of the mind is enlightened, but it's got these pollutions that are hindering you from being able to experience it. So this is one of the ways to eliminate any craving for any particular stage of enlightenment, is just to imagine that the mind is already enlightened and you just got to get the pollution out of the way so you can experience those qualities. Okay. So the way that you get to these 4 stages of enlightenment is by learning and eliminating these 10 fetters. This afternoon, I'm going to go through these in details and explain to you what they are and how to eliminate them. So these are the 10 fetters. They're organized in the lower fetters and then in the higher fetters. And you're going to learn about these more this afternoon after our lunch break. As you're removing those 10 fetters, you're moving through these 4 stages of enlightenment. They're referred to as stream enterer, once returner, non-returner, and arahant. Easily, we could say first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment. And this is when your mind's actually enlightened, when it's in the 4th stage of enlightenment. It's referred to as a stream enterer because just like a log enters the stream and it's going to eventually get to the ocean, once you enter into the 1st stage of enlightenment, you will get to enlightenment, either in this life or some future life, a maximum of 7 rebirths. So again, you might have been in the 1st stage of enlightenment in a previous life, and now you're making your way back to that and even maybe beyond that. So getting into the 1st stage of enlightenment, we call it stream enterer because once you get into the stream, you're going to get to enlightenment. It's only a matter of time. Just like the log entering the stream is going to eventually get to the ocean. Then we have this stage called once returner. We refer to it that way because if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you're going to come back into the human world one more time, and you will get to enlightenment in that existence. So again, some of you might have been a once returner in your previous life, and this is that next life to now be able to get to enlightenment. There's a 3rd stage, which is called non-returner. We call it a non-returner because if you die in this stage of enlightenment, you won't come back to this human world. You're going to be reborn in the heavenly world, and you will get enlightened from that existence. This isn't ideal. This isn't what you would actually be looking to accomplish, but if that's what you accomplish, okay, great, fine. You die in the 3rd stage, you're reborn in the heavenly world, you get to enlightenment there, and then you escape the cycle of rebirth. Those beings in the heavenly world, they're still in the cycle of rebirth. They still need to get to enlightenment. Hell and heaven, it isn't a permanent existence. It is impermanent, just like everything else around you. So getting into the heavenly world as a non-returner, you will get to enlightenment in that existence. But you can get into the heavenly world in other ways too. There's not just one door to get into the heaven realm. You can actually be reborn into the heavenly realm even if you're in the jhanas, like you saw earlier with the words of the Buddha. Even not being in the jhanas, you can actually still get into heaven as well. But if you enter into the heavenly world through this door where your mind is in the 3rd stage of enlightenment, you will get to enlightenment. But those other beings coming into the heavenly world, they have an opportunity to get to enlightenment, but they may not, because oftentimes those beings are complacent by the time they get into the heavenly world. But a non-returner being reborn into the heavenly world, they won't be complacent. They will get to enlightenment in that next existence in the heavenly world. So that's why we refer to it as a non-returner. And then this word arahant, this was in use during the lifetime of the Buddha. It means someone whose mind is fully purified. That's what the word arahant means, is that your mind's been fully purified of the 10 fetters. Today, we would just say probably enlightened being. And we understand that an enlightened being has a fully purified mind. But this word arahant is still around. It's being used, so you'll see this around and you'll hear this, so you'll know what it means. And that's the 4th stage of enlightenment. Then there's something called a Buddha, which is not a stage of enlightenment. This is a unique individual that is very rare in the world. They essentially meet 3 criteria. One is they get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. They then dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people, and countless people get to enlightenment during that person's lifetime. And then the 3rd criteria is that they preserve their teachings in such a way that after they die, countless more people get to enlightenment after their death. So these are the 3 criteria that make a Buddha, is they get to enlightenment by themselves, they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings, and countless people get to enlightenment. And then they preserve their teachings so that after their death, countless more people get to enlightenment. This is very rare. And the last one that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So you're going to need guidance and help along the path. And you'll be an arahant. Your mind will be enlightened, but you won't be a Buddha at that point. Okay, so these are the 4 stages, and then there's an actual individual who actually is an arahant. A Buddha is an arahant. They've just done it in a way that is unique, is that they got there on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides, because they have that quality of mind where they have a deep memory and they can pull forth all their wisdom from all these countless lives that they've had into their last life to be able to train their mind to get to enlightenment without the help of any teachers or any guides. So here's the fetters that you're eliminating as you're making your way through the 4 stages of enlightenment. The 1st stage of enlightenment, you would have eliminated personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. Again, we're going to talk about that this afternoon. As a once returner, you've already eliminated personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances, and you've thinned out sensual desire and ill will. This is why I share with you that you can actually still be maintaining a sexual relationship and be in the 2nd stage of enlightenment. Your life's going to be quite peaceful. You'll probably actually enjoy sex a lot more than when you weren't in the 2nd stage of enlightenment, because at this point, you're more interested in having pleasure for the other person. It's not just about your own selfish desires, where when we're not in the 2nd stage of enlightenment and we're having sex, it might just be all about yourself and your own selfish desires in this sexual experience. But by the time you get to the 2nd stage of enlightenment, if you're still choosing to have sex, you might notice that it's a lot more pleasurable because you're more interested in seeing the other person be pleased. And then because of those choices, that's all coming back to you. And this person is also functioning in a similar way, that they're also trying to please you. So this is why you need to be careful if you're choosing to have a sexual relationship in this 2nd stage of enlightenment, because you can get bogged down in that and you can be holding on to these pleasurable experiences that you're having in this particular stage of enlightenment. Then the non-returner, they've eliminated all the 5 lower fetters: personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, sensual desire, and ill will. Those have all been eliminated from the mind. And then by the time you get to the 4th stage, where your mind's actually enlightened and there is no more discontentedness, you've eliminated all the 10 fetters. Okay? So as you're moving through these 4 stages of enlightenment, within this stage of the stream enter, as a stream enter, the 1st stage, your discontentedness has significantly diminished. It's a mere fraction of what it once was. You're still getting discontent, but you don't have the extreme irate anger that you once had, and you're not having the extreme sorrow and sadness that you once had. It's come in even more than the jhanas. As I was talking about from the jhanas, it's come in more to the middle. By the time you get to the 1st stage of enlightenment, it's come in even closer, where you're experiencing just a fraction of the discontentedness that you once experienced. Then when you move into the once returner, again, it's come in more, that you've reduced discontentedness even more. You might be getting discontent like maybe once a week, or once every 2 or 3 weeks, you're experiencing some discontentedness. Maybe even once a month or once every 2 months, you're experiencing a certain amount of discontentedness, but not the extreme anger and not any kind of extreme sadness, but it's more muted and it's not as significant as it once was. By the time you get to this 3rd stage of enlightenment, your discontentedness is almost non-existent. You're experiencing discontentedness like once every 3 months, once every 6 months. It's very infrequent and it's very insignificant. And when it's occurring, it might even only be 30 seconds to a minute or two. And you know exactly what it is and you cut it off right away. You know that it's a craving, desire, attachment, and you address it. But you need to be careful in this third stage of enlightenment because once again, the mind can become somewhat complacent because you're experiencing so much pleasure. And when I say pleasure, not conditional pleasant feelings, but enjoyment. You're not clinging to this enjoyment, but the mind is just having fun. You're just enjoying life. But every once in a while, you feel this little bit of ickiness in the mind. And because it's so infrequent and it's so insignificant, the mind can become complacent. And when you see that little bit of ickiness in the mind, you might be like, no, that's not discontentedness. No, I'm enlightened. You might even think you're enlightened when you're in the third stage of enlightenment. You might be like, no, I'm enlightened. That's not any kind of craving. So you need to stay attentive to the mind that even in these infrequent situations, in these insignificant discontentedness that you're experiencing, you need to stay dedicated and diligent and determined to root this out and root out these cravings. Even if you're experiencing the slightest ickiness, even for 1 second, the mind is not yet enlightened yet. By the time you're enlightened, the mind's not experiencing any ickiness, even just 1 little second, even a brief half a second. The mind's just always peaceful and joyful, not even the slightest ickiness. So if you have even that slightest little bit of ickiness, the mind's not yet enlightened, and there's the potential that you're in this third stage of enlightenment, and you would like to continue to make progress. So stay attentive to the mind. The same things that got you to the third stage of enlightenment will help you to get to the fourth stage, where you can eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments, or anything that the mind is holding on to. By the time you get to this fourth stage of enlightenment, there is no discontentedness at all. None whatsoever. It's been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Your mind's not experiencing any discontentedness, and not even the slightest little bit of ickiness. And when your mind is experiencing this, I encourage you to not convince yourself that you're enlightened. Because as your mind's getting closer and closer to the fourth stage of enlightenment, you might get to a period where you convince yourself you're enlightened. And if you convince yourself you're enlightened, there's the potential for the conceit to arise or complacency to arise. And if complacency or conceit is arising, you're not enlightened yet. So if you convince yourself like, wow, I'm enlightened, look at this, my mind's so peaceful, it's been 3 months since I've experienced any discontentedness. You just got boastful, you just got arrogant, you just got prideful. Your mind's not enlightened yet. You got to keep working at this. So if you convince yourself that you're enlightened, then your mind's not enlightened, right? You need to be able to stay dedicated and diligent and determined. By the time you get to enlightenment, you will know that the mind is enlightened. You'll know that it's enlightened, but just don't convince the mind that you're enlightened, because what led to your getting to that stage of enlightenment, this fourth stage, is cultivation of wisdom, that you've been cultivating wisdom for multiple years by the time you got to that. And by the time you get to enlightenment, if you convince yourself that you're enlightened, you might just kind of like kick back and go on autopilot. And if that's the case, your mind's not enlightened. You would like to continue this practice of cultivating wisdom, because there's more than just the teachings of the Buddha to cultivate wisdom about. Maybe, for example, you've always been interested in flying a helicopter. And now that your mind's so clear and so concentrated and so focused, and you've got this deep memory, you might be interested to go learn how to fly a helicopter. Go cultivate that wisdom. There's more wisdom out there in the world. Or maybe whatever livelihood that you're choosing to do, there's more wisdom to cultivate about that, to do it even better, right? So there's always more wisdom to be able to cultivate. And you've gone through so many years of cultivating wisdom to be able to get to that fourth stage of enlightenment that you're not going to just stop cultivating wisdom, because you've seen that wisdom leads to wholesome results, and that you've constantly been doing that for many years. And it's led to the most amazing thing that you've ever experienced in your life, which is the complete elimination of discontentedness. And I don't suggest you just stop cultivating wisdom, because there's many things in the world to cultivate wisdom about. Yes, the path to enlightenment, but there's many other things too. So if you've gone through this body of wisdom, this body of knowledge, this body of content, all these resources, and you've cultivated wisdom to solve the biggest problem you've ever encountered, which is the discontent mind. Now that you've solved it, your mind is performing optimally. You have concentration, you have focus, you have clarity of mind, you have deep memory. Your personal and professional relationships are at ease. All your relationships, there's no bitterness or hostility or aggression or hostility or anything like this in any of your relationships. Your life is now set up for nothing but success. So if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, if you're interested in building a nonprofit organization, if you're interested in flying a helicopter, do whatever you would like to do. One of the ways that I think about getting to enlightenment is it's like the beginning of the rest of your life. That now you have the whole rest of your life to enjoy whatever it is that you're choosing to do, whether you're a retired grandmother, whether you're going to do a nonprofit or any of these things that your mind aspires to do. You probably are doing those things on your way to enlightenment, but once you get to enlightenment, there's many countless things that you could potentially do. So if you convince yourself that you're enlightened, you may not do those things. So don't go on autopilot. Just continue to grow and develop from that point forward. Because even though we say that the mind is enlightened and you're in the fourth stage of enlightenment and you're no longer experiencing discontentedness, by continuing to meditate and continuing to grow, there's actually higher and higher degrees of concentration, higher and higher degrees of development of your mind. So once you get to the fourth stage of enlightenment, you don't have the fetters in your mind anymore. Your mind's fully purified, but there's more room to grow. That's why an enlightened being continues to meditate and they continue to learn and they continue to develop their wisdom because there's more room to grow beyond that. So it's not like there's a finish line, right? If we ran a marathon or some other race, we put all this work and all this effort into a race, and boy, when we cross the finish line, we feel so good. It's time to relax. Finally, I've been eating this certain food for a year. I've been racing. I've been practicing. And now I'm just going to let everything go to waste, right? I've crossed the finish line. I'm done, right? I'm just going to sit here and relax. That's not the way enlightenment is. By the time you get to enlightenment, not only is your mind performing optimally and all your relationships are at ease, but you don't even feel exhaustion or tired anymore. You can sustain your energy all throughout your day. So if there's anything that you're interested in doing or applying your mind to, now that you fine-tune this mind, you can apply it to any particular challenge and you can solve that particular thing. So this is like the beginning of the rest of your life. You've fully purified your mind. You're set up for nothing but success from this point forward. And it's not a night and day thing. It's not like there's a light switch. Your mind's going to gradually move in to these qualities that we're talking about. Okay, so this is the fourth stage of enlightenment, the stage of an arahant. So now, how to attain the four stages of enlightenment? Well, a well-developed practice of the Eightfold Path. That's what's going to take you to enlightenment. That is the path to enlightenment. When we talk about the path to enlightenment, it's the Eightfold Path. That's the path to enlightenment. Those three sections of wisdom, moral conduct, and mental discipline. You're going to need to know it like the back of your hand, inside and out, backwards and forwards, up, down. If you haven't been able to memorize the Eightfold Path yet, I would encourage you to do that. So if I asked you, what is right intention? You should be able to speak, say that. Right intention is the intention of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. Boom, 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 boom. What is right speech? Oh, the elimination of lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. Boom, 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 boom. Every single step. Because in order for you to practice it and actually train your mind to the degree that you're going to need to in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to have the Eightfold Path memorized and ingrained in your mind. It's like a new operating system in your mind. Like if you're unenlightened, the mind is on unenlightened 1.0, but you need to upgrade, incrementally upgrade your operating system of your mind to enlightened 9.0, right? And you're incrementally upgrading your mind. And part of that upgrade is you're going to need to memorize the Eightfold Path. And you're going to need to know it cold, inside and out, backwards and forwards, like the back of your hand, because you wouldn't be able to practice it if you didn't memorize it word for word. Like you don't have to literally memorize the words of the Buddha about the Eightfold Path, but you need to know what each one of those steps are and that each one of them have certain factors. So within that, right action, for example, you need to know what right action is, that you're eliminating the killing, you're eliminating stealing, you're eliminating sexual misconduct. But more importantly, it's eliminating any harm from you causing harm through the bodily actions. That's what you need to learn. You don't need to know the exact words of the Buddha, but you need to know that part of it, right? So each piece of this Eightfold Path, you're going to need to know the wisdom, moral conduct, and mental discipline. You're going to need to eliminate all the 10 fetters. So you're going to need to know what they are. You're going to need to know what the symptoms of them are. You're going to know what the training and techniques and tools are to eliminate them. And you're going to need to know how to know and determine that you've actually eliminated them. So we're going to get that process started this afternoon, where I'm going to teach you what the fetter is and how to eliminate it. If you decide to take the retreat in August, I'm going to teach you all 4 things. I'm going to teach you what it is, how to eliminate it, how to what it is, the symptoms, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. Those are the 4 things that you need to know about each fetter. What it is, what the symptoms are, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've eliminated. That's what you'll ultimately need to know about all the 10 fetters. But this afternoon, I'm just going to teach you what it is and how to eliminate it, because you're going to need to do that work first, okay? That's what you're going to need to know for the 10 fetters. Then, in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to know these things. You're going to need to deeply understand dependent origination, the natural law of karma, the 5 aggregates, and the 6 sense bases. This is what I teach in the January retreat. The January retreat has all of those things. And you can be studying those things even before then, because I have it in the book series and I've recorded that January retreat. So it doesn't mean you have to wait until January to learn these things. Particularly if you're going to attend the August retreat, you might decide to watch the videos from the January retreat that I taught, but that's where I teach all of these things. You're going to also need to develop what's called accomplishment in view. There's establishing right view, which is understanding the Four Noble Truths. But then there's what's called accomplishment in view. And I teach this in that January retreat. So there was an actual class where I taught accomplishment in view. There's more than just the Four Noble Truths that you need to learn and practice in order to be able to be practicing accomplishment in view. So this is something else that you need. Then you also need to practice accomplishment in generosity. Again, something that I taught in the January retreat, because everything in the January retreat is all about getting to the first stage of enlightenment. It's called developing a life practice to attain the first stage of enlightenment. So there's a class where I teach about accomplishment in generosity and how to know what that is and how to actually practice it. So you're going to need to have all of these things on board in order to get through the first 4 stages of enlightenment. You're going to also need to have association with wholesome persons. This is the words of the Buddha, that you will have made choices to associate with wholesome individuals. Not that you're looking to judge people or look down on them, but by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will have understood the natural law of karma very closely. And you know that any decision you make to associate with someone who's into unwholesome things, it's going to affect you. And you would choose wisely not to associate with people who are in unwholesome things. So for example, maybe I have a friend from when I was 10 years old that I was always friends with this person and we always had a great time growing up. But maybe sometime around 16, 18, 20 years old, they got into selling drugs and I didn't. But I still hold on to this relationship because they've been my friends since I'm 10 years old. Or now maybe we're 20 or 30, maybe they're still selling drugs and I'm still hanging out with them. By the time you get to understanding the natural law of karma and you're in the first stage of enlightenment, you would know that this is unwise because this person, maybe you're walking down the street with them, maybe a rival drug dealer sees them, starts taking shots at them with a gun. Those bullets don't have names on them and they're very likely to hit you. Or say you're driving down the street and they're in the seat next to you. Maybe they've got a bunch of cocaine in their pocket. The police pull you over for speeding. And when you're not looking, they slip the cocaine under your chair, right? This is what the Buddha refers to as the snake won't bite you, but it'll smear you with feces. Right? So your friend isn't going to bite you, but you might get smeared by this, right? And at the very least, as you're walking around with people that are into unwholesome things, your reputation is going to be formed based on that. So you might find it very challenging to develop your life when you're associating with people who are in unwholesome things. Again, we're not judging people. We're not looking down on them. If someone would like to sell drugs, hey, that's their decision. That's up to them to decide. We're not trying to change that person. But by the time you've gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, you understand the natural law of karma, that your choice to associate with someone who are doing these kinds of things are going to cause you unwholesome karma. You're not the one selling drugs. You're not the one shooting guns. You're not the one doing these unwholesome things, but it's your choice to associate with unwholesome things and unwholesome people that are in unwholesome things that is bringing you the unwholesome karma. It's your choices that are leading to any particular result. So by the time you've gotten to the first stage of enlightenment, you're associating with wholesome people, and you have the wisdom to make the decisions to be able to do that. In order to get to these 4 stages of enlightenment, you would have had to heard the true teachings. This is what the Buddha teaches you. These are his words, that if you're learning all these different things, like there's 8 jhanas, or ordained practitioners are the only ones that can get to enlightenment, or you only experience the jhanas when you're in meditation, and all these other things that I help you guys to be able to see very clearly, you would need to have heard the true teachings in order to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. In other words, you're not going to just stumble your way into the first stage of enlightenment. You're not going to stumble your way into it and like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm in the first stage of enlightenment. Wow, look at this. You're going to be consciously making decisions to learn the true teachings through the original words of the Buddha, and you're going to be consciously making decisions to develop the Eightfold Path to be able to get into the first stage of enlightenment. So you would have had to heard the true teachings. Then the Buddha talks about how in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you would be practicing careful attention. This is related to the natural law of karma, that you would understand that any decision that you make is going to produce a certain result, either wholesome or unwholesome, and you're going to pay careful attention to all your decisions. You're not yet making 100% wise decisions by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, but you're at least paying careful attention to any decisions that you make. Where you live, where you work, the type of friends that you have, the type of things that you purchase, the type of things that you eat, these kinds of things. You're going to pay very close attention to the things that you're doing. You're not obsessed with it, but you're taking the time to make sure that you're making wise decisions. You're paying careful attention to the types of decisions that you're making. And then the Buddha talks about practicing in accordance with the teachings. Not only do you understand the teachings intellectually, but you're practicing them. That's what's going to produce the improvement to the quality of the mind. You could understand intellectually a certain teaching, but you're not practicing it. Like we grow up knowing that it's unwise to lie. We grow up knowing that it's unwise to steal or take substances that cause heedlessness, but we still do it because of our craving, desire, attachment. So in order to get into the first, second, third, and fourth stage of enlightenment, you need to be practicing the teachings, practice in accordance with the teachings, because that's what's going to eliminate the pollution of your mind. You're not practicing the teachings as rules or commandments. There's not like a bunch of check boxes that if this person is physically doing these things, they must be enlightened. It's all about the quality of your mind. By practicing living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, which is the first precept, it's helping you eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. By choosing not to steal, you're eliminating craving. You're eliminating ill will towards other beings. You're eliminating ignorance. By eliminating sexual misconduct, you're eliminating craving, anger, and ignorance. By eliminating lying and substances that cause heedlessness, you're eliminating cravings. So it's not that you're just doing these things physically. It's not a rule or a commandment. It's that by doing these things, you understand that it's eliminating the pollution of your mind, and you will be practicing the teachings in accordance with the teachings, because now that's working to eliminate the pollution of the mind. And this is why those heightened qualities of focus and concentration and all those other qualities of the jhanas that I talked about are starting to be experienced, because the mind is eliminating the pollutions. You can't get to those improved qualities of mind by just doing a physical thing, by following rules or commandments, but instead by understanding what's plaguing the mind with the pollution, and by practicing in accordance with the teachings, it's decreasing and working to eradicate the pollutions, and that's where those improved qualities are starting to shine through. So in order to get to these stages of enlightenment, you need to be practicing the teachings, because that's what's working to eliminate the pollutions of the mind. And then the Buddha talks about this in terms of moving to the first stage of enlightenment, that you're maintaining bodily, verbal, and mental acts of loving kindness, both in public and private, towards companions on the path to enlightenment. That means the members of your community. So you wouldn't be at lunch gossiping and slandering one of your fellow members of the community by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, because you understand that these people here are the people who are supporting you and encouraging you and helping you on your journey to enlightenment. Your teacher is helping you, but the members of the community are helping you too. Because when you see people being polite and kind and friendly and respectful, when you see people practicing generosity and different things like that, you're learning from that. And it's like, oh wow, I really like how that person changed the batteries of the microphones, and that's really generous, and maybe I'll start trying to do some more generous things around as well. And now you're learning from people. So the last thing you would be interested in doing is degrading or diminishing one of your fellow members of the community. So the Buddha is teaching you that that's what an individual will do, not as a rule or not as a commandment, but just because you understand intellectually wisdom that these are the people that are going to help you get to enlightenment. Your teacher is going to help you, but you need other members of the community to help you too. And that's not what you wouldn't be interested in degrading or diminishing these people either publicly or privately, because you know that they're the ones that are going to help you get to this improved quality of mind. And you would have already experienced the jhanas by this point, that by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you know that it's these people that have helped you to be able to do that. So you wouldn't talk in degrading or disparaging ways about members of the community, either bodily, verbal, or mental acts of loving kindness towards all people in the community that are helping you to be able to get to enlightenment. That this is what you would be practicing because you have seen that they've been supportive and encouraging and helpful to you in your journey to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Okay, so this is what you need in order to get to the 4 stages of enlightenment. We're going to be talking about the fetters after lunch, because knowing what those are and eliminating those is what will move you through the jhanas and through the 4 stages of enlightenment. So any questions on the 4 stages of enlightenment? Let's see if we have anything online. Okay. I don't think I see any questions here. All right. So it's lunchtime. We're going to take a lunch. Are you guys okay with an hour and 15-minute lunch today? Come back at an hour and a half. Anybody attached? I'm sorry, come back an hour and 15 minutes. Anybody attached to an hour and a half lunch? Hour and 15 is good. You guys are okay with the impermanence? Okay. So I will see you guys at 1:30. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you then. Okay? All right.